Implicit Bias Theory. Implicit bias theory explains how people can unconsciously hold attitudes or stereotypes that influence their thoughts, actions, and decisions without realizing it. These biases are automatic and often hidden from our conscious awareness. While we may think of ourselves as fair or unbiased, implicit biases can lead us to make judgments or behave in ways that reflect underlying stereotypes about race, gender, age, or other characteristics. The concept of implicit bias gained attention through research in social psychology, particularly with the development of tools like the Implicit Association Test, IAT. The IAT measures how quickly individuals associate certain concepts, such as positive or negative words, with different social groups. The test often reveals hidden biases, even in people who believe they are free of prejudice. Implicit biases develop over time through exposure to societal stereotypes, media portrayals, and cultural norms. From a young age, people are influenced by what they see and hear in their environment, which can shape how they unconsciously perceive others. These biases don't only come from overtly negative messages but also from subtle, everyday interactions and patterns we observe in the world around us. For example, in Western media, people might often see images of men in leadership roles and women in nurturing roles. Over time, these repeated associations can form an implicit bias that influences how we perceive men and women in certain contexts, even if we consciously believe in gender equality. Similarly, if a particular racial or ethnic group is frequently portrayed in a negative light, this can lead to implicit biases that affect how members of that group are perceived, even by those who don't consciously endorse racist beliefs. One of the most important aspects of implicit bias is that it operates outside of our conscious awareness. This means that even people who genuinely believe in equality and fairness can still act on these unconscious biases. For instance, a teacher who believes they treat all students equally might, without realizing it, give more attention to one group of students over another based on implicit biases about race, gender, or academic ability. Likewise, hiring managers may unknowingly favor applicants who belong to a certain group based on hidden biases about their qualifications or work ethic. Implicit bias is particularly relevant in fields like criminal justice, education, healthcare, and employment, where decisions can have serious and lasting consequences. In the criminal justice system, for instance, implicit biases can influence how police officers, judges, and juries perceive and treat individuals of different races. Studies have shown that people of color are more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, and given harsher sentences than their white counterparts, often due to implicit racial biases. In healthcare, implicit biases can affect how doctors and nurses treat patients. Research has found that Black patients, for example, are sometimes less likely to receive pain medication or be taken seriously when they report symptoms compared to white patients, due to unconscious biases about pain tolerance and credibility. While implicit bias is a natural part of how human brains process information, it's important to understand that having these biases doesn't make someone a bad person. Everyone has implicit biases to some extent because they are a byproduct of how we learn and categorize information. However, acknowledging that implicit bias exists is the first step toward minimizing its impact on our behavior and decisions. There are several strategies to reduce the effects of implicit bias. One approach is to increase awareness through education and training. Many organizations now provide implicit bias training to help individuals recognize and address their unconscious biases. By becoming aware of these biases, people can start to question their automatic judgments and make more conscious, equitable decisions. Another strategy is to increase exposure to diversity. Research has shown that spending time with people from different backgrounds and perspectives can help reduce implicit biases. This is because repeated, positive interactions with individuals from different groups can weaken the associations between certain stereotypes and social categories. Additionally, creating structured decision-making processes can help reduce the influence of implicit biases. For example, in hiring, using blind resumes where the applicant's name, gender, and race are removed can prevent hiring managers from making biased decisions based on irrelevant information. Similarly, in the classroom, teachers can use objective criteria for grading and feedback to ensure that all students are treated fairly. It's also important to recognize that addressing implicit bias is an ongoing process. Simply becoming aware of biases doesn't mean they will disappear overnight. It requires continuous effort to reflect on our thoughts and behaviors, and to challenge the stereotypes that may unconsciously influence our decisions. Over time, with practice and commitment, it is possible to reduce the impact of implicit biases and create fairer, more inclusive environments. Critics of implicit bias theory argue that focusing too much on unconscious biases can take attention away from more explicit and intentional forms of discrimination. They also point out that not all implicit biases necessarily lead to discriminatory behavior, and that people can consciously override their biases when making decisions. However, research consistently shows that implicit biases can and do influence behavior, especially in situations where people are making quick or automatic decisions. In recent years, the concept of implicit bias has become a hot topic in discussions about race, gender, and social justice. Advocates for addressing implicit bias argue that it's a key factor in understanding how inequality persists in society, even in the absence of overt discrimination. By tackling implicit bias, individuals and organizations can take steps toward creating more equitable and just systems. In conclusion, implicit bias theory sheds light on the unconscious attitudes and stereotypes that shape how we perceive and interact with others. While these biases are a natural part of human cognition, they can have significant consequences in areas like criminal justice, education, healthcare, and employment. By becoming aware of implicit biases and taking steps to counteract them, we can work toward more fair and inclusive systems, where individuals are judged based on their merits rather than unconscious stereotypes.